Okay, so today, brothers, I want to share with you one of the aspects of God's name. So it's not going to be a class on God's names and what they mean. It's really this one aspect as to, in order for you to have fame, hence the title, No Name, No Fame. And this is a study that sort of developed quite a few years ago, and I'm consistently just tweaking it and so on. So you'll see in the background there, we'll reveal it a bit better, as a kind of a spreadsheet that I have shared, and I'll share that spreadsheet with you all, put it on the WhatsApp group for you if you find you might have any value to you. The way this came about was there was a time, and I suppose it happens from time to time, where you get these cycles coming around where people get very passionate about God's name, or it becomes a topic for controversy sometimes, unfortunately. But at some stage in my life as a Christadelphian, I looked at this. I got in connected with an ecclesia that kind of stated that you need to read God's name and use it, not as a criteria for fellowship, but almost like that. So it was kind of the rule, if you were in those circles, to use the name in that particular ecclesia. But subsequently, with my studies, I do read God's name as Yahweh, where it appears as Lord in capitals in the Old Testament. And hopefully this study will show you why. But the study is not there to advocate or push for that. The study is really there to see what is this aspect of God's name, and why then it might be useful for us to think at some stage, at some level, if we're not going to read the name Old Testament, we need to talk about the name a lot and remind each other what God's name is, and have a good understanding, so that when we do see or read it or talk about it, all these things will come to mind that will strengthen our faith. So the diagram has the following aspects to this whole idea of God, and the very fact that he wants to have the earth will be filled with his glory, means that it will be filled with people who will carry his name and will have the characteristics of God, which is linked with that name. Because in the Hebrew culture, which comes out in this topic as well, it is kind of well known that a name in Hebrew signifies some kind of characteristics, and then if a person was given that name, it often might have been because of what the parents wanted that person to become or be, or what might have even be prophesied about that person. So Jesus' name, obviously, Yahshua, means God saves, and that was the very purpose of God with his son. So it's a classic example. Unfortunately, often we get names and then later find out the meaning, and then we're not so sure if we can live up to that. So my name, Lucas, means the giver of light. I have a lot to live up to in that regard. So notice now in these headings, we're going to look not at all of them tonight. I'm going to try and explain to you the rationale behind this diagram, because there is a certain rationale. But the categories can be studied, and the verses are below these headings. I just want you to see them. So first of all, we're going to look at this principle of fame and glory that is inextricably linked with your name. So you cannot be famous if your name is not known, that type of idea, and how it applies to man himself and then to God. That's the gray areas there. And it's fascinating when hopefully you'll find it as fascinating as me, to see how many verses there are in the Bible that touch on these topics and actually explain it very well, whereas other people in the world will talk about these things and think it's worldly wisdom. If there's anything good in the world anyway, it's always found in the Bible first. Then we'll look at this aspect of God's name being a memorial. And already that should tell you, if God wanted his name to be a memorial, the name, he wanted it to be known and remembered for forever and ever. So how we need to ask ourselves, how much is God's name a memorial in our Christadelphian brotherhood? There's a fascinating idea here. We will do this red square as well tonight, just the blue and the red one and the gray ones, and the one green one at the bottom. I might do the rest later, partly because it'll take too long, and I haven't finished that part as a presentation like tonight, which I would also like to do. But anyway, we're going to look at certain things God does just for his name's sake. And then something else there that I hope you're going to find fascinating as to the real famous great people in the Bible, like Moses, David, and Jesus himself, that understood this principle and used it as leverage with God. Imagine. So I hope you'll find that as fascinating as I do. Then there's this whole issue about the name. When we understand it correctly, it should be an immense faith builder for us, because the name, the bottom line of God's name, Yahweh, is all about we can trust him. He's the all faithful and reliable God. And he was with the people in the past, he's with us in the present, and he will be with his people in the future. God is always there, basically that idea. And you know, just quickly, a verse comes to mind that God's name is a refuge and a tower that we can run into for protection. Then there's this whole aspect in the Bible about calling upon the name of God in the brown block there. What does it mean to call upon the name of God? And there's a whole few aspects there. This is a very interesting topic in the kind of light pink color there, the New Testament supposed silence on God's name, because a lot of people say, well, God's name is nowhere in the New Testament, so we don't have to use it or you know, talk about it or read it in the Old Testament, because it's not even in the New Testament anyway. The argument there is that God is now our Father, which is a much more of a privilege. So we don't need to address him by his name, because we have a higher privilege, which is addressing him by his title as our Father. So we'll have a quick look at all of these, not the verses, but just some ideas that will come out of this after we've done just the first 4 blocks. Show you the verses. Okay, then there is a aspect of this to show how in the Old Testament God's name was obscured, and he was very unhappy about that, obviously, and how we run the risk as a Christadelphian community to do the same, where we, ironically enough, focus so much on our own name and having to explain where it comes from, Colossians, and it means brothers in Christ, and people then ask us, yeah, but what about the sisters? And all those kind of things. And then, you know, we have all the focus on our name as a community, and we might err on the side of not giving God's name all the glory and necessarily exposure that we should. Another aspect on how this whole idea of the name of God, and there has to be a name for him to fulfill his ultimate purpose of being all in all, is the purpose God had with the Israelites amongst the nations. And you will see that a lot of that had to do with these nations then knowing God and his name, and so it's not a case of the in the Old Testament, it wasn't a case that God said, I want these people to know that I am their God and I'm a different God than the others. they needed to know that it is Israel's God is Yahweh, and Yahweh means the following. So when he revealed his glory to Moses, for example, he didn't just say, here's my glory, I'm full of compassion and long suffering and loving kind. It first said, it said, when Moses saw God's glory, God declared his name to him twice. Yahweh, Yahweh, full of compassion, and so on. So it's first the name and then the character of it associated with the name. And that's what God wanted to happen amongst the nations. People would know, oh, Israel's God is Yahweh, and that means, and then all the rest. It's fascinating to see how this idea of God wanting to be famous and his name must be known was the purpose in the Old Testament. And then the block here that says the future shows how all that will happen in the future. For example, Jerusalem in the future, when Jesus returns, will not be called Jerusalem anymore. It will actually be called Yahweh Shammah, meaning Yahweh is there. The very name of the city in the future will have God's name in there, so you can't not mention the city without pronouncing his name. A very interesting verse here. The reason for the whole book of Deuteronomy is linked with this idea that God will be famous by everyone knowing him. I find this blocks at the bottom here in olive green fascinating, because if you take the Old Testament where God had a literal temple built and said, I won't place my name there, that's the natural, becomes the obviously first the natural, then the spiritual. When God puts his name there, it becomes a type of picture for the future, where now the temple is us and we are living stones, a spiritual temple, and God chose us for a people for his name. And we won't do that tonight, but it's in the Old Testament, people would go to Jerusalem and then they would say, this is the temple of Yahweh, Israel's God. And then the people, by the way they were supposed to behave, they would then know what this God is like. God has changed that now to living stones. We are all going to proclaim God's glory. So we tell people about God's name and what it means and the characteristics that go with it. So God is still, his name is still in a temple, but it's us now. And then the last little topic on this whole side topic of God's name is this idea that in the Bible you find that the spirit of the true believers are very much aligned with this whole idea. They want God to get the glory. They love his name. They talk about it often, and they love anything to do with what God's name represents and what it means to them. All right, so I hope, can anybody tell me if at least that made some kind of sense where this diagram is going, although we're not going to do all of it?
Makes sense to me. Thank you,
Okay.
Lucas.
All right, so let's look at this first principle then, and as promised, we are just going to do a few of them. So there is all the verses. It's very small, don't worry. I'm going to put a slide up now that shows us this principle for mankind, and then the next slide will have this part of God there. So let's do that now. So notice that you're going to find in the Bible that it is so obvious that in order to be famous, people have to know your name. And I've put down at the bottom here, we know this very well from sports, right? It can be linked with idol worship because there are certain people that will know. I would guarantee that the majority of people these days know their sports stars or music stars or whatever, movie stars. They know their names, and they might even know what their names mean, much more than they would know God's name. The point, though, being is that if I would mention a name, Michael Schumacher, obviously most people would, that he was so famous for Formula One motor racing, they would immediately associate that name with the sport and the skills he had and so on. And when we look at any sports event, we either look at those events for our team that is playing in our state, and they've got a name, and that name's got, and they got a mascot that matches something to the name, and so on. But if you can imagine, if you said to some people, right, there are two arbitrary people just going to play a game of tennis, player A, player B, and we don't know them, no one is really interested, right? So it's quite obvious. But in Psalm, for example, I'm not quoting all the verses in the blocks, but they are all listed there for you. But for example, in Psalm 49, 11, 12, and 17, there's this wonderful idea where the psalmist says that these rich people, their inward thought is that their houses shall continue forever, their dwelling places to all generations. They call their lands after their own names. You know, we're all very familiar with this. Nevertheless, man being an honor, so there's the honor and the name link, abides not, he's like the beast that perish. For when he die, he shall carry nothing away. His glory shall not descend after him. And in Proverbs 10 verse 7, the memory of the just is blessed, but the name of the wicked shall rot away. So here we have this idea of if we live forever, you know, I personally believe if I'm saved, my name will be Lucas in the kingdom, and if you live forever, then that name is there forever. Whereas wicked people, you know, we don't even know who won, you know, whatever racing Formula One 30 years ago. Who was the #1 racing driver then? Who knows? You know, famous, very short-lived, and then it's who's the next one? Who's the next one? So notice here in Ruth 4 verse 11, we have the same idea. And all the people that were in the gate and the elders said, this is obviously Boaz, we are witnesses, Yahweh, make the woman that is come into your house like Rachel and Leah, names that were remembered, so they were famous in that culture, which two did build the house of Israel. And do you worthily in Ephrata and be famous. In the margin, the Greek for that is proclaim your name in Bethlehem. Be famous in Bethlehem means in the Hebrew, proclaim your name there in Bethlehem. And the woman said to Naomi, blessed be Yahweh, that he has not left you this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. So clearly in the Bible, we're not surprised about this principle. Without no name, there's no fame. So let's see how that applies to God. You will notice in the Psalms, it's just absolutely amazing. It is so much in the Psalms, but also, excuse me, on the left there, I would like you, as we go through some of these verses, notice that these verses are taken from every book all over Scripture, especially the Old Testament. So, you know, it's not just limited to the Psalms. It's everywhere in Scripture. So Psalm 86:12, I will praise thee, O Lord my God, with all my heart, and I will glorify your name forevermore. And in the Psalms, most verses where you see it's said that we will glorify God's name, it's also linked with praise, right? Psalm 102:15, so the heathen shall fear your name, and the kings of the earth your glory. God's glory, the glory you will have is linked with his name. Everyone will eventually, by the time Jesus hands over the kingdom to God, God will be all in all, and everybody will know God's name, use it. We will even inherit that name. The Jews will say, blessed is he that comes in the name of Yahweh, and they will give God the glory, and we will all have the characters linked with what that name represents. In Joshua 6:27, it says, the Lord was with Joshua. His fame was noised throughout all the country. If you read it like that, you might think it means Joshua's famous. But in the cross-reference in Joshua 9, verse 9, it was actually talking about God. They said to Joshua, from a far country we have come, the servants, because of the name of Yahweh your God, for we have heard the fame of him and all he did in Egypt. So God's mighty deeds, that's another theme comes out of this. God did a lot of things in the Bible for that his name might be magnified and known, and that is famous. So we find that this happened to the Queen of Sheba. She heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of Yahweh. She came to prove him with hard questions. It's not that the fame that she heard, that Solomon was famous, and she heard about Solomon, but it was in context of what news came to her about the name of his God, Yahweh, and what that entailed, and that's where the fame of Solomon came from. She wanted to know the questions she asked him, and you'll find in 1 Kings 10, she even when she asked him questions, she uses God's name. She says to him something about, tell me about Yahweh, your God. She uses the name of God when she questions him. And so we can go on. I am the Lord in Isaiah 42:8. That is my name. I am Yahweh. And my glory will I not give to another, neither my praise to graven images. Isaiah 12:4. And in that day you will say, praise Yahweh, call upon his name, declare his doings among the people, make mention that his name is exalted. So, it's a different saying, God is wonderful. He helps me every day. He's an ever faithful God. And he does wondrous things, but this verse indicates we must more or less say we praise Yahweh because we call on him, because that very name shows us why he's doing these wonderful things, and we will make mention so that that name is exalted above anything else. So there is some practicalities here as to we have to decide how we're going to do this. Or are we just fulfilling the one where we declare his mighty works, but nothing of his name is mentioned? Psalm 29 verse 2, give unto Yahweh the glory due unto his name. Worship Yahweh in the beauty of holiness. And so it goes. There's a bit of a link with true worship in all these verses. In Isaiah 25 verse 1, O Yahweh, you are my God. I will exalt you. I will praise your name, for you've done wonderful things. Your counsels of old are faithfulness and truth. That is the very name of God embedded there. He's a God of faithfulness and truth. He can never change. Same yesterday, today, tomorrow, in terms of being reliable, keeping his promises, being there when we need him, and so on. Okay, so I hope you see this can be hopefully the diagram can be a bit of a reservoir of verses should you want to just zoom in on a bit of an aspect of God's name, and specifically to this theme. Let's look at this whole idea of God's name being a memorial. I find this also fascinating. Here we are. So we all know what a memorial is, and James, I'm not picking on you, but I think the rest of the people here are all South African, or whoever's overseas, you won't know this, but we have a very famous memorial in South Africa. It's called the Voortrekker Monument. It's a huge building standing on a hill there near Pretoria, and every time you drive past Pretoria, you cannot not see it. And it was serves as a memorial for the pioneers, the Voortrekkers, for a battle that they won way back in history, and they made a promise to God that they will thank him forever. So a memorial is something obviously that jogs your memory, makes sure it comes back in your memory, and it can either be a building, But in this case, with God, he wants his name to be a memorial. In other words, it has to be brought to memory for everlasting. So we find this idea in Exodus 3:15. God said to Moses, you will say to the children of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, have sent me unto you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. Some people will make the argument that that ended with the Old Testament. I believe no. God wants this to happen, and we'll see here the next verse, Psalm 72. I want to highlight this for you. The very reason Jesus returns and comes in the name of Yahweh is so that he can continue the name of his Father forever and ever, for everlasting. So in Psalm 45:17, it says, I will make your name to be remembered in all generations. Therefore shall the people praise you forever and ever. And Psalm 72 says, his name shall endure forever. His name shall be continued as long as the sun, and men shall be blessed in him. All nations shall call him blessed. The Hebrew for that, I should add it here, the Hebrew in your margin for that verse carries the meaning of he will be, and it's prophetic of Jesus, we all know this, he will be a son that will continue your name forever and ever. And that is what Jesus is going to do, because he's already inherited God's name. His very name, embedded in his very name, is God's name, Yah, Joshua, Yah saves. And he is forever going to continue his Father's name. Right, I'm not going to read all of them. I just want to go down. They all more or less make this point. In John 7, verse 17, verse 6 and 26, Jesus mentions part of his work, what he did, and it's there's a cross-reference there to Psalm 22 to show that when Jesus says, I have manifested thy name unto the men that you gave me out of this world, and then he says in verse 20, he says, I've declared unto them thy name, and will declare it, right? In that the love wherewith you have loved me be in them and I in them. In Psalm 22, verse 22, it's quoting, that was prophetic of Jesus, I will declare your name unto my brethren. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you. Again, the name being used and said, declared, links up with the praise that God gets, the glory. And so I don't think it's a stretch to say that Jesus, obviously, when he was preaching on earth, would talk about God and talk about Yahweh. Or I often wonder, because the Jews were very superstitious. They didn't want to use that name, and I don't have proof for this, but I wonder if he did actually use the name, or for their sake not. But knowing Jesus, stirring up controversy on other ways when he did the truth and they didn't like it, I do believe he most probably did touch on that, or use the name, or definitely thought about it. Then, all right, Deuteronomy 25 verse 5. Why are we quoting this at the bottom here? It links up very nice with this verse in Psalm 72, where Jesus will continue his Father's name forever. In the law of Moses, there was this idea that a son was to continue his father's name forever, or a brother would marry the wife of his older brother if older brother died, to continue the family name on forever. So you can go look at that aspect, but Jesus will fulfill even that part of the law eventually when he comes back to continue his Father's name forever. So that's a lot of things about God wanting this name of his to be a memorial for everlasting when Jesus comes back and beyond. Okay, let's look at this little portion. The purpose of Israel amongst the nations. And there, I want to highlight this. I don't know if you knew this. You can mention it when we give time for some feedback. But I believe from the Bible that in times of the Old Testament, people swore by the name of God, and they were, it was nothing unusual or wrong with it. And Jesus, in a way, like he does with all the Old Testament principles and practices, comes and makes it even higher, in the sense that he says, don't swear by God's throne or so on. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. So in a sense, we are taking on God's name and his character, and we are striving to be such faithful people, so reliable, that when we speak, we don't even have to say pinky promise or on my, hand on a Bible. People just know from our lives that if we say something, we are going to do it. We don't have to try and spice it up. Our yes is our yes, and our no is our no. And people know from past experiences they can count on us. So let's look at this then. 1 Kings 8:41. Notice what King Solomon is doing here. He says, moreover, concerning a stranger that is not of your people Israel, but comes from a far country for your name's sake. It was the vision of Solomon that the Israelites there would be this huge temple, and it would be the temple of Yahweh. And the way this nation would worship God, and the blessings they would get other people, like Rahab, for instance. It's really interesting. When Gideon came before that, Rahab knew about Yahweh. It uses the name there. She knew about the name of God. So God's name goes ahead, his reputation. And then people would look at Israel and say, we want to go to that country, not to see the nice surroundings, or we want to go there to see the temple of Yahweh. It had to do with something with God's name and what it represented. For they shall hear of your great name. You can't hear of a great name if it's never mentioned. And of a strong hand, and of your stretched out arm. So there's first a name and then the character. The two always go hand in hand. You can't have one with the other, right? And when it shall come and pray towards your house, hear thou in heaven, thou dwelling place, and do according to that the stranger calls for thee, that all people on the earth may know your name, to fear you, and do as do your people Israel. We know they miserably failed in that, and that was the whole purpose of God here, but it didn't come to pass. And that they may know that this house which I've built is called by your name. Right. And here's some verses to show that people could swear by God's name, and there was nothing wrong with that. Therefore, hear the word of Yahweh, all Judah, dwell in the land of Egypt. Behold, I have sworn by my great name, says Yahweh, that my name shall no more be named in the mouth of any man of Judah in the land of Egypt, saying, Lord Yahweh lives. So notice God swears by his own name, and he says, because of your disobedience, I won't allow that you use my name anymore, because we know that's where it comes to, taking God's name in vain. If you associate with God, you take on his name, but then you live a life that brings it into bad reputation. Jeremiah 12:16 shall come to pass, and they will diligently learn the ways of my people, to swear by my name. Yahweh lives, as they taught my people to swear by Baal. Then they shall be built in the midst of my people. So in Jeremiah, God says, and this is actually what Jesus is going to do when he comes back. It's going to change Israel, where they are now, people are swearing by false gods and believing in, not godly at all. And God says there will come a time they will diligently learn the ways of my people, to swear by my name, right? So very interesting verses. I feel obviously the Jews have gone far away from what God wanted from them in those early stages of the history, where you could use God's name, pronounce it, swear by it, but live lives then that would give honor to that. You can't come and say I'm a Christian and Christ as my king, and then you live these terrible lives, and people will just despise Christianity and Jesus, like unfortunately happens in the world today. Look at Samuel in 1 Samuel 20. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for as much as we have sworn both of us in the name of Yahweh, saying, Yahweh be between me and you." Okay, so they swore an oath upon the name of God between themselves, right? Deuteronomy 6 verse 13, you will fear Yahweh your God, serve him, and you will swear by his name. We can maybe discuss this. I believe from the New Testament now, Jesus has said, we go one step higher now. Our very lives must be of such that we can just say yes and yes and no, no. But if we had to, we don't put our hands on the Bible, even at court. So, but it's actually a higher calling to live a life like that than using this practice of swearing by God's name. Would like to hear your ideas about that, maybe. Okay, the last one. Let's look at this idea of what God does for his name's sake. And then this was the fascinating part for me of the study, is men that knew this whole idea what God did for his namesake and used it as leverage. Okay, so let's notice here. First of all, let's just look at the top part. Isaiah 48 verse 9. I haven't quoted all these verses here, just some of them, but you can make your own list of what God does for his namesake. For my namesake will I defer my anger, and for my praise will I refrain for thee, that I cut thee off. Now that's exactly, in Isaiah, he is quoting what Moses asked God to do for his namesake, not to destroy all those people. Right. For verse 11, for my own sake, even for my name's sake, will I do it. For how should my name be polluted? And I will not give my glory to another. Psalm 25:11, for thy name's sake, O Lord, pardon mine iniquity, for it is great. I think it's David speaking here. And notice that I believe David, the verses are down here as well. Yes, Psalm 25 verse 11. We will look at it here, or let's do that now. David knows he is sinful, he's a king, and he's truly repented, but he still uses this idea of saying to God, please forgive me, because your name, associated with your very name, Yahweh, is this idea that you are long-suffering and you will forgive and pardon. So I'm really calling on the very character that your name is famous for, in this case, to forgive me. That kind of understanding of this whole concept brings people to approach God in interesting manner like that. Psalm 79 verse 9, help us, O God of our salvation, for the glory of thy name, and deliver us and purge out our sins for thy name's sake. Psalm 106 verse 8, nevertheless he saved them for his name's sake, that he might make his mighty power to be known. Often God will save us so that he becomes famous if we're in trouble situations. And sometimes he will save Israel even though they are not worthy to be saved. Otherwise, like Moses said to God, if you kill off all the Israelites, then people will say, oh, you had a plan, but it didn't work. This God can't be so mighty because his plan didn't work. Okay, I'm not going to read those verses. In Ezekiel, similar things. Look at Jeremiah 14:21. Do not abhor us for thy name's sake. Do not disgrace thy throne of thy glory. Remember, break not your covenant, the covenant with us. So in Jeremiah's time, when Israel is so bad a nation and worthy of God's punishment, Jeremiah knows what God, what he wants his name to be famous, with the end result of his prophecies coming through, and he calls on that for his very namesake. Don't throw away your covenant, because your very name is a faithful one. You won't break any covenants with people. It's almost like, I don't know. Let's look at Moses, for example. And then I find this fascinating, because to me it's like Moses is bargaining with God on the basis of, yeah, you can't do this, because then it's going to go against the very purpose you have with your name being famous and everyone knowing you. And it's like God actually says to him, right then, I won't do it, but as sure as I live, the earth will be filled with my glory. So Moses in Numbers 14 verse 15 says, if you will kill all these people as one man, then the nations which have heard the fame of you, obviously his name, they will say, because Yahweh was not able to bring his people into the land which he swore unto them, therefore you have slain them in the wilderness. And I should actually add the next verse, because you can almost hear, sorry, by God's reaction was, okay, fine, you got a point, but here's some caveats to that, and I won't do it. Okay. Joshua 7 verse 8, something similar. Oh Lord, what shall I say when Israel turned their backs before the what shall I say when Israel turns their backs before the enemy? So Joshua is pleading to God that they will conquer the enemies, and if Israel has to turn around and the enemies subdue them, then it's for the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land shall hear of it, and shall circle us around and cut off our name from the earth. And what will you do unto your great name? So, Joshua does the same as Moses. He says, in your plan and purpose for your great name, please, help us, because if we get annihilated here, then your purpose and your great name will suffer. So it's very interesting. I would like to hear your thoughts on this. All right. David asked for pardon, like we saw up top here. Notice 1 Corinthians 29 verse 11. Thine, O Yahweh, is the greatness, the power, the glory, the victory, the majesty, for all that is in the heaven and the earth. Thine is the kingdom, O Yahweh, and you are exalted as head above all. Both riches and honor come to thee, and you reign over all. And your hand is power and might, and your hand is the might to make great, to give strength after all. Now, therefore, O God, we thank you and praise your glorious name. It's because of the ultimate purpose of God that will come to fruition in Jesus, because of all those things that has happened to make that come to pass and will still happen to finalize it all. That's the reason why we thank God, and we will always praise his glorious name. Okay, I'm not going to do the others. So just a quick 2 minutes to just show you some other things in this diagram, which I'll mulch if you want. In the green block, we've discussed that. What I would like to look at is this supposedly New Testament silence. Just a few points here. There is definitely an additional privilege to calling God our Father, and we should do that. But the easiest way to explain this is in the analogy of what is in the Bible. We are adopted sons and daughters. Now, if you would, let's say you were an orphan, and there's you get adopted. What will happen is you will now have a father and a mother that fulfill that role, and you call them father and mother. But you will also have a surname that you get from that father and mother. And if someone would ask, who is your father, you're not going to say, oh, my father at home is my father. You're going to say Mr. Smith, or my father is John Arlington, or whatever. I'm just thinking of names now. So the fact that we have this additional privilege to calling God our Father and a close relationship with him doesn't take away the fact that we want to give honor and glory to his name and know all about his name and understand what it means. So there's an emphasis on now calling God our Father, but it's not substitutional. The example there of God, of adopted sons. Those verses will give us that idea. And then, we should see the whole Bible in a context. The New Testament does not say we should not use the name. Actually, in Hebrews 13, verse 15, the verse says we must give God the sacrifices of, using his name. So there's more evidence that point to that God still, his name is important, and we can actually offer up praise to his name as a form of thanksgiving. And if you cross-reference Psalm 68 verse 4, you'll see that the evidence is there for that. There's a lot of Old Testament quotations in the New Testament, so if you would translate them correctly, God's name would be there. And then there's some other verses here that I've listed that shows us this whole idea of God's name still being very important, even now in the New Testament era. Also, I don't think I've listed it here, but the very fact that Jesus's name is in the New Testament 888 times means God's very name is in the Old Testament, in the New Testament 888 times, because he's got the name of his Father, Yah saves. So every time you read Jesus, you are reading God's name embedded in there.